Welcome to Baltic World. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
This is our week in review. Baltic World discusses important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. Before we begin, how are you, Crispin?
I am superb. We had a fantastic announcement from the federal government earlier in the week saying that the international borders of Australia will start open from November.
Yes!
That just changes everything. I mean, psychologically, we kind of knew at some point the borders would open, but we didn't know when. We've actually been stuck on this island since March of last year.
Yeah.
And that's long enough for demography to change. I mean, for example, 1/3 of all marriages in Australia have one person from overseas. There is a kind of a cultural tradition where people, when they leave school, they go on what we call a gap year, which is basically time between high school and university, or university in the workplace, where they'll go and travel around Europe or the US for a whole year. And often when they're doing that, they'll meet people and fall in love and have relationships and get married. So it's a very kind of an important rite of passage for many young Australians.
Yeah, I particularly know that, like, talking to people, you know, older people being like, oh, this is the time for you to travel. And I can't do that. Like, I'm missing out of like a really important part of my 20s. I can't go out and travel and see the world. Like, I'm kind of stuck.
Exactly.
And it's so great. But there's certain conditions, right? So 80% that they say for vaccination rates for us to.
Yeah. So although the federal government will be opening the borders from November, each of the state premiers, so we're a federated system, each of the state premiers are setting their own conditions for when they will allow people to basically access the airport. And 80% vaccination rate seems to be the magic number for a number of premiers. Some of them are holding out to like 90%, which may not seem like much more, but once you start to get into the people that are really vaccine hesitant and don't want to get the vaccine, then it's going to be difficult to get to that high figure. But 80% should be more than enough. And at the very least, it means that international flights will become popular again. We'll start to see people coming and going. There'll be slow infusement of everyday life back into the community. And also the pandemic will have to arrive on our shores. We have a complete suppression strategy. So the number of infections is quite low. When we have more international travelers, that number will increase and hopefully we'll just come to live with the disease, which is where we need to get to. And most importantly for this channel, it means that we will be able to...
Oh, yeah, to travel! Yay!
So we're looking already at destinations for the Baltic states next year. So very likely around spring of next year, we will come and visit all of you wonderful people, and I'll try and organise one or two public events while we are travelling, so we can kind of set up and maybe have an auditorium somewhere and just have a discussion with the audience about issues facing the Baltic states and the rest of in context to the rest of the world. That would just be fantastic. Or if that's not feasible, just go out for drinks and lunch or whatever with the audience. That would be fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you. Yeah. And it'll be a wonderful thing to discuss.
One thing I've underestimated with the borders being closed for so long is it's affected a lot of industries, right? So obviously the obviously travel and tourism industry has been particularly affected. It's crushed.
Hospitality, crushed.
Entertainment industry crushed. Cruises, even though my family love cruises, not me, don't like boats, but other people love cruises. Crushed. And then also everyday things. I'm trying to see whether it's toss and turn to buy a new car. And there's a shortage of cars. And it's actually, in Australia, it's actually more feasible to buy a new car rather than a second-hand car because of that shortage. And renting as well, because people aren't leaving the country. So rental are really hard to come by now. It's just, I'm looking forward for the borders to open just because there are certain industries that's been suppressed for so long and they're just waiting, really, to operate properly again.
Hopefully the world has learned a lot of lessons about how not to handle your economy in the midst of a crisis. There are
it disproportionately affects people, right? Like, obviously the people that are in scalable industries thrived, but the service industry were crushed. And, you know, it doesn't really help our wealth inequality that really exists now. It's just deepened it.
Yes, well, I mean, the top, few billionaires, top 10 people in terms of global wealth have increased their wealth some $700 billion over the course of this pandemic, while many, many people have been absolutely gutted. So, yeah, just seeing a bit of cultural economic revival. And, you know, Australia is a country that is geographically isolated, and yet we haven't felt isolated leading into this pandemic for quite a while, because we had so many international flights. Travel was becoming easier and easier.
Did you know we had a direct flight to Wuhan like 2 weeks before it shut?
Sure.
A direct flight.
Yeah, all kinds of direct flights. Actually, that's one of the things that I think accelerated the political decline in our relationship with China has been the pandemic. One is the call itself for investigations into the origin of the disease, which is completely reasonable, but also the fact that all the flights were shut down. There was a very strong constituency in Australia to kind of, you know, continue to work on the relationship, continue to have dialogue, because we had flights going not just to Beijing and Shanghai, but to all kinds of the provinces in China, direct flights to Australia. We were probably one of the most connected to China in terms of travel of any in the world. And we have 1.52 million Australians who are of Chinese descent, you know, one sitting on this couch here. And there's that long sort of cultural link. But politically, because of the shutdowns and the isolation, those differences didn't have that counterbalance that we previously had. And so the differences have become more obvious. Also, you know, naturally, the CCP behaviour has been insane. They've become far more aggressive over the past few years, and, you know, punishing Australian exports and all kinds of things. So understandable in that perspective. But I do think the fact that we don't have the same people-to-people connections has accelerated the trend that was already underway, which is, you know, desegregation between the two countries.
It's a careful balance at the moment, right? Because as we try to open up, we want more Chinese people, especially university students, to come back. You know, it's our largest export education, and that's one industry I didn't mention. That's crushed. Like, the university are like dying, essentially, you know, trying to get as many people into their campuses as possible. But with no international, our borders closed, how?
Well, I don't think that's going to revive. I don't think that's coming back. And there's two reasons I say this. One, the Chinese government itself has given travel advice about coming to Australia. Apparently, if you're a Chinese person in Australia, you're subject to all kinds of racist violence. And
really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the Chinese government telling people not to travel here for tourism, essentially. And it's absurd, of course. We have, as I said, you know, nearly 10% of our population is Chinese, and there doesn't seem to be any I mean, Charlie would know better than me, but there doesn't seem to be much racial tension in the community. No. So I think Chinese people coming here are perfectly safe. But obviously the Chinese government doesn't want people to travel here, so they are ratcheting up the xenophobia. And then the second reason is there's a lot of criticism on our universities at the moment, which there's a feeling that they have become hotbeds of Confucian teachings, right? So because they get so much money from China, there's a sense that they're sort of kowtowing to the CCP, and there's a high degree of antipathy among the Australian community towards the tertiary institutions. So given the fact that...
Wasn't there also research from universities helping them with their... authoritarian system of the face, recognition?
Yes, you actually nailed one of the issues. So some of our AI research and things like that have been helping the Chinese security services. And so there's a lot of anger towards our tertiary institutions, and also a perspective that they are sort of cultural hotbeds of wokeism and things like that as well. And...
What are you saying, Crispin? I turned out okay.
Yeah, in spite of the university system, not because of it. Let me ask you this question, right? And this is a serious question. If you did not do this channel, if you were not learning information, taking sources from a variety of different areas and putting that together and coming up with your own view. If you only took what you learned as university in terms of the opinions you receive from your professors and things like that, how different would your worldview be than what it currently is? I mean, so the answer, I mean, obviously it's partly rhetorical.
It's partly rhetorical, yeah, it is.
Because you could imagine you just listening to the voices of your professors right now and the sort of things that they would say and sort of indoctrinate you into. And how radically different from what your actual worldview is. And that is because you have a high degree of critical thinking skills. You take that source and you take other sources, you synthesize it and you make your own judgments. Whereas people that don't have that kind of critical thinking ability will go to university thinking they're becoming educated, whereas in fact they're just becoming indoctrinated. And as a consequence of that, they just regurgitate the dogmas that they've been inculcated to in a church-like way.
Yeah.
It's understandable that people are looking at universities not as a place to open minds, but a place to program people. And in Australia, there's a strong attitude towards that. Well, I mean, one bits of evidence for the Australian anger is that even though the tertiary education sector is our third largest export, the numbers of people who have been out there advocating to support the tertiary education system has been extremely low. I mean, the federal government has been able to kick the tertiary education system over and over this past couple of years with all kinds of new restrictions and limitations and rules and things. And there hasn't been a wide scale group of people out there pushing back against this. Most people are like, yeah, this is way overdue. And if the university system was doing what it was supposed to do, if it really was that bastion of turning people from little bits of clay into critical thinking masters of analyzing and interpreting the world, that would not be the case. We would have people out there on the streets by the millions saying, no, keep your hands off our universities, because the universities are helping people grow, but they're not helping people grow.
I have felt like, I think towards the end of my degree, of just how different the culture felt, like in terms of like you kind of feel more like a number because of that very reason. The universe is kind of like slowly losing respect in wider society as a place to share open ideas and critical thinking. Like it's and like even the students themselves may like, you know, they can't even afford to get onto campus because parking is so expensive now. Like there's all these little things that have trickled down. Yeah, and I guess nowadays, like education, you can get education everywhere else. So there's online educational sources, and I don't know, it's so weird, like because yes, you got to learn critical thinking, but like it takes time. Yeah, I don't know how reliable these things are. Because I'm just like, oh yeah, university is great. You know, that's what my parents told me to go to. That's why I did it. But it's probably changed now. Like, will I recommend my kids to go to university? I don't know.
Well, it's also what you study, right? So
maybe medicine and law, like those things but not law in China.
Well, I probably wouldn't recommend law in Australia either. The same kind of problems apply. I would say if I was to recommend my children study something, and this goes so far against my values, I can't actually even believe I'm saying this, but I'd say, look, you know, medicine, engineering, computer science, like hard science sort of degrees or maths degrees, things like that, I would support because they don't have the same degree of ideological capture, let's say. But the liberal arts degrees, which I would have thought historically will be among the most important things for people to learn. You know, learn the Greek classics and learn different literary traditions and analyzing different forms of art over the various centuries, ancient history, Renaissance, all of that. I would have thought was mandatory, and I will definitely, if I have children in their own education in private life or find a good college that'll support it during their schooling years open their minds to those kinds of texts. But I would not recommend someone go and learn the humanities in an Australian education institution today, because it's not. Very rarely will we be opening people up to different points of view, and far more likely they'll be kind of indoctrinated into what we could politely call the new left, and it's really damaging.
Didn't you do a humanities degree?
I did, and I in some ways I was lucky in that I was exposed to different points of view, but it was getting worse progressively as I was going along in my university life. I could tell that things were changing in a negative way. Universities have always kind of been left-leaning, but that's it's I always saw that as a self-selection, that academics tended to drift a certain way because of their career path, but it wasn't to the exclusion of other points of view. And self-respecting academics would give balanced perspectives and genuinely encourage their students to think about different sides of an issue. Like so for example, one of my great professors, a really underrated professor who deserves significantly more acclaim than he has ever received. His name is Jai Chen, and he is from China. He came over during the sort of revolutions. He was in Australia doing his PhD, because there was no PhDs in China at the time, doing his PhD in Australia when Tiananmen Square happened in 1989. He couldn't go home because many of his fellow students had been rounded up. And so he stayed in Australia as a dissident. And so he spent his entire career in an anti-CCP, anti-China kind of crusade, supporting Taiwan and all those things. But when I was going through his classes, and this is, won't say how many years ago, but a number of years ago, where he went out of his way to talk about like the CCP perspective on things, their century of humiliation, the reasons why they view things in a particular way in terms of the South China Sea and Taiwan and Tibet and so forth. He really presented a balanced point of view. And it was only after he insisted on lively debate within the classroom that you got any inkling at all as to what his political tradition was. Like I've kind of laid out his worldview, but I only knew that because I went into his office one day and insisted on learning about this, because I found him very perplexing. And that's the kind of thing that you really want from your academics, is that they're not there to give you their point of view, really. They're there to give you the tools to rationally deduce what your own point of view is. And I have to say, he was well ahead of the curve when it came to the Communist Party, because at the time Australia was just riding the wave of mining boom and support from the relationship with China was making everybody rich, and thus it didn't seem at all like the Communist Party was a bad thing, that they were becoming more and more liberal as the economy was opening up and everyone was getting richer, and there was this perspective that the whole system of government was liberalizing. And Jai Chen is like, you guys just don't get it. Like things are going to go the other way. And he started to sound a bit like a reactionary, it's like, oh, he just doesn't understand modern China. China is complete. But no, he actually understood it a lot better than most people in his classroom. Full credit to him, because I think he predicted a lot of things that have unfolded.
Wow. It's quite amazing how it's like almost a crystal ball. But I mean, that obviously came with a lot of thought and research, and
it did. It was, and he obviously is born in China, he's native Chinese speaker, but he would go back to China. Like, he's been back to China a number of times, as a foreign national. And each time he goes back, he said, look, it's been transformed each time. Like when he left, people were riding around on bicycles without any wheels, right? Whereas they go back, everybody's got mobile phones and tablets and all these things running, and then he goes back again, no one's using cash anymore, everything is like super. And so he was saying, even I as a Chinese person would go back and have a cultural shock, and then but realize very quickly that no, things haven't actually changed societally, things have changed technologically, but in terms of the politics, in terms of the autocracy, in terms of the mechanisms of social control, they're exactly the same. And he said that in fact it's getting worse. So, I mean, we haven't spoken in a long time, but I still think about him. I think he was if I was to write my own kind of Marcus Aurelius meditations, Johnny Chen has had a significant impact on my intellectual development. So it is possible to find academics who inspire you, and but they are an increasingly rare breed, and I'm sure, like, even when I look at the other members of the faculty of that university, and I won't name their names, but I can think of like 3 or 4 people just right off the top of my head who are just ideological automatons. Like, they're very extraordinarily average people.
There's so much. It broke me. But there's so much pressure in academia to pump out research. No longer is it quality research anymore. It's quantity now. It's part of like their benchmarking for how well a university is progressing, and it's quite shameful, really, because we want to have all the research, not just selected ones. And like even now with COVID, like we're making this huge policies based on this research that isn't peer reviewed. That hasn't been like, yes, we believe in vaccines, of course, but like realistically, that we haven't invested that time in really digging deep and using our critical thinking skills to ensure that the policies that we are creating right now and all these border controls and all these other aspects are based on true research. No,
I think there's an element. I mean, on one level, it was always thus. Like, there's always people complaining that they used to be able to do more research, now they can't. But I do think there has been a change in the business model towards more teaching colleges, because if you think about the numbers of people getting university degrees, you go back a couple of generations, it was something that 5 or 10% of the population did.
It used to be more exclusive. Right.
Exclusive and only relevant for some people. Okay, like university wasn't thought of as like your mainstream thing to do. It was only if you wanted to do specific professions. Whereas now university is the default, right? People. Now it is also for the educated people who are obviously on this panel, but also at home watching. It might feel like everybody does university, but in fact, it's still only about a third. But a third is way, way more than had ever been the case in the past. Most people don't have a university degree.
But universities aren't that bad, right? Like, there are benefits for university. I know earlier videos you pointed out before it's a great way to find like-minded people, friends, and future partners.
It is. Like with Australia doing its gap year thing, the other place that people find their partners is at the university campuses. It is the right time for it. And if I had children, I would put a certain degree of pressure on them to consider. Well, I think that when I was at university, there were so many opportunities, let's say, to get married and have family and things. And I didn't do it then for a variety of reasons, and I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing in retrospect. But I think I would have appreciated more the social time that I had there, because at the time I was working full time and studying. Like, I was trying to make as much money as possible, and studying was sort of a thing I did on the side. And then it was only over time that I grew to really love university. I didn't go into it with any degree of expectation. And so had I gone into university with the expectation that I was going to maximize my life at university, would have done things differently. But I have observed many people at university and people that are still on my Facebook and things from those years who absolutely found their partners on campus, have families. lived happily ever after. At least, in terms of the Facebook projection world, very happy people. And so I think it is a good time.
Well, it's a good sample because they're educated, right? They're like-minded. So in terms of, where they want to go. And well, I think those are very two determining factors, right, for an ideal partner.
Yes, up to a point. It doesn't work once you get beyond undergraduate. All right, and I'll explain why. So when you're doing your undergraduate degree...
So it's like your first 4 years or so.
Yeah, doing your bachelor's degree. That's when you find your partners. But once you get into your master's and PhD, don't look for partners there because...
They're taken?
No, it's you don't want to have, and I'm really sorry for all the attractive PhD women out there. You don't want to have a PhD wife, right? And the reason for that, and I know this is controversial, but the reason for that is it's very hard in academia for you both to pursue your career. And once you've invested 10, 12 years of study into your life, you're going to want to do something with that. You want a return on that investment. You don't want to just put your PhD on the shelf and never see it again. And thus, it's very, very difficult to negotiate having a career with two academics. If you got one person with their PhD in philosophy and another person with their PhD in computer science, how are you going to get a job in the same university? Like how? It never happens that way. There's a huge surplus of people with these kinds of qualifications,
right?
And you therefore, in order to get a job, you need to go where the jobs are, and they're never going to be in the same city. So it means that one person is having to make a tremendous sacrifice where they've essentially wasted a significant portion of their adult life in order to support their partner, and then that kind of can breed resentments and all sorts of issues within the relationship, and also. Both as a matter of culture, but also biology, women are still trained to marry up. And because you've got a much higher proportion of people who are PhDs now being women than men, because there are more women going to university and more women staying at university, it's very hard for these women to find a marriage partner whom they would normally see as marriage material, because those men are either already taken or they're dating women who are younger than women who have reached that part of their career happen to be. So it's not a good idea to so I'll put it this way. I would change that slightly. If you're already married and you're in a comfortable, happy relationship, absolutely, if you're a woman, go on and pursue all the academic accolades that you can, because you're doing that within the context of a marriage that you already have. You're not going, are they going to fit into my life in the future? They'll be like, all right, we can do these things because we're already in this situation and we can pursue these paths, and you've negotiated that between you, which is fine. But if you're on the single dating market, very very difficult guys for you to find, to choose women in that category, and I say that with regret because it is a trade-off, right? You don't want to curtail your education, you don't want to stop people from achieving all the things that they can achieve in life, but there is a trade-off. There is a time period that you've got, and you've got to really think about those choices. It's not, and if I was...
So you're saying, right, because PhD takes so long in time investment, it's, if you have a PhD, your pool's smaller?
Your pool is smaller in terms of the people that you're going to be looking at to get married to. Your pool is smaller in terms of how you can negotiate a successful relationship with your studies. So let's say you've done your undergraduate degree and you find a person, you get married. It's not as big a sacrifice for one person, say the mother, to take time out of the workforce to look after small children and then come back into the workforce at a later time. That they haven't invested that many years in terms of their higher education that it's an essential characteristic. Okay. Whereas if you have done a PhD, well, you're pretty much the world expert on that thing that you've done your PhD in. Plus, there are all the mentors and things that have helped you along the way, all the conferences you've gone to, the name that you've created for yourself as an academic or an expert in that particular field. Very hard for you to then go, oh, yeah, I'm going to give all that up so my husband can earn money and support the family, right? Like it doesn't happen that way. And what does happen is that women who are in that category will usually marry other highly accomplished men, because that's the way, both those are the people you meet and also just the way society works.
Yeah.
Very difficult for you to be doing things in the same place. Like forget having children. Like how are you going to do your lecturing at university in Arkansas while your partner's got a job in Scotland? Like it's such a, you have to be a globetrotter as a academic, because you have to go where the jobs are. So I just think it's a really bad idea to expect to find your partner in the higher levels of higher education. Find it at the undergraduate level, align your life paths at that point, and then you can make decisions about what's possible in terms of future professional development. I think that's just a bit of life advice for young people. Don't leave it till everything's... And this was a change in my own view over time as well. I thought that, look, and this is an attitudinal change that's occurred in my mind. I have a certain view on my intellectual abilities, and I expected that I would not be able to tolerate a woman in my life who did not match that, right? Okay. No. It's like it makes sense, right? Like if you, as a young person, when you're trying to navigate this, it's like you want someone who can challenge you, who inspires you to be better, who can observe accurately your flaws and help you work on them. That you can bounce ideas off in. You don't feel like you're talking down to them. You don't want to feel like there's a power imbalance in the relationship. And one of the power imbalances that exist can be intellectual, right?
Right.
So I thought, look, I want to be a power couple. That was my attitude as a young man, was like, I want to find a woman who's highly accomplished and that we can support each other in these great career paths and things. It doesn't work. It just does not work. And not because...
You're trying to one-up each other?
That you do if you're in the same field.
Sure.
And that's not as big a problem. You can actually work that out. It's more just... She's got her own things that she wants to do. You've got your own things that you want to do. Having a life together and a family together and all of those things just becomes really practically difficult. And also, as I got older, I realized how many dumb people go through university. So, it means that like I had a greater appreciation for people that have never been to university and who are still, equal to any Harvard graduate.
Right.
Or in fact, less indoctrinated, more open-minded. So that also increased my pool beyond that as well. I realized that it's not an essential characteristic to have a academic career or a professional career and to be of a strong intellectual caliber.
Yeah, it's one aspect. One other thing I really like about university is the friends that you make. So it's really, I'm out of university now, but catching up with some people, it's amazing to reflect back on those moments where we're just doing all these different activities. Unlike you, I was working full time, but then working part time at full-time hours, but involved a lot of club activities and all the social events. And I remember staying really late at some of these club activities, being like, what are we doing? Will we get anywhere? And reflecting now, meeting up with them now, is so great to see them on different paths or where they wanted to go, where they wanted to be. So it's kind of celebrating those wins and establishing those friendships early on and being part of that journey with them. Yeah. Enough about university. I'm so done with studying. This week, about Week in a Review is reviewing the videos, right? So this week, talks about Lithuania. One thing that I'm really excited about is this railway, is transportation. I wish we had that in Australia. Freight is so expensive in Australia. Maybe it's just impractical, but for the Baltic, very practical. But I'm confused. So what's the main barriers for basically establishing it?
So some of
earlier?
it is, well, mostly administrative.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So 85% of the funding is coming from the European Union.
Sure.
And the European Union is a massive bureaucracy. So that takes a lot of time. And they have their own timeline for when they expect things to occur, which is way longer than any rapid kind of development would allow. So the European Union has an expectation that this will be completed by 2030. Okay, so 9 years. The countries involved, so Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, had a much shorter timeline in mind, by 2026, 27, basically. And there's a lot of work that needed to be done. So remember, these countries had been occupied by the Soviets. Yeah. So they were left over with Soviet-level lorries and things like that. So it was difficult to do the work in the first place because things had been dilapidated, unreliable, unsafe. They need to be brought up to standard in terms of rail networks. And secondly, they have different size tracks in the different countries. So, you've got a normal width of rail line. We all have to make sure that aligns perfectly across the entire direction of the track, so the trains can run on them. Yeah. And then there's the engineering side of things to make sure that the high-speed rail networks of a high quality. There's been some issues with construction of rail lines in recent years in these countries as well. Yeah. And then the environmental laws. So as I said in the video, Estonia had a court case where the Supreme Court partially upheld an appeal from environmental groups saying that the proposed corridor through Estonia hadn't done the necessary groundwork for the environmental protection laws. And thus, you've got to go through all of those approvals across different jurisdictions, different languages.
Yeah. Okay.
It is an administrative challenge, even within the Shenzhen area, even within the European Union. And then mostly now, money seems to be a problem because the pandemic, economic growth forecasts have been radically curtailed. When all of these rail projects had been designed initially, it was with a view that the certain amount of economic growth was projected over the 5-year period that would pay for everything. Well,
but it hasn't happened.
Has not gone that way. Things have changed a little bit, and so there's that. But I don't want to see Estonia use that as an excuse, because I think that there is tremendous upside potential of this project, so much so that I think the relevant governments need to make it a priority. If other things need to be put off, they can push those things down. And indeed, as I said in the video, getting international finance for something that is such a clearly beneficial project. I'll put this in perspective. So I
wonder what the actual risks are if they haven't.
Oh, there are many risks, and there was the OECD did do a kind of risk analysis of the road and freight networks of the Baltic states recently. I found that quite interesting. But that wasn't this project specifically. It was like all transportation. Sure. And there are many things that they could do to improve. It's not to say that it's bad. They could improve, and these projects do carry all kinds of risks. But no, I'll put this in perspective. The actual rail network from Tallinn to Warsaw is estimated to cost around 6 billion euros, plus I think 400 million euro cost blowout in Estonia because of the change in corridor that they have to go through because of the court case. But let's say you add another 2 billion euros on top of that. So 8.5 billion euros for this project. A high-speed rail network connecting these countries will by far exceed the economic growth of 8.5 billion euros in the context of maybe 4 or 5 years at most, right? Because you've got, attract huge amounts of foreign tourists, people moving there. As I said, the biggest challenge that these countries face is the demographic problem. So aging population, a lot of younger people in particular, not just not having children, but moving westward to find higher wages and things. If you had this sort of infrastructure in the eastern part of the continent, then a lot of people will be attracted back home to invest locally, because it's that sort of infrastructure that drives and allows for greater innovation. And people also, young people, and you can definitely get that in Australia, they're having to live further and further away from the inner city areas because that's where housing is affordable when they're young and starting out. Well, if you have high-speed rail, you actually really allow for that.
Practical.
Okay? So young people who need to go and work in the inner cities because they're the sort of professional jobs they're going for, but can't afford to live in the inner city, well, they will be able to afford places in more rural areas, and they'll be able to still get to work every day because there's a high-speed rail network to get them there. And then all the things that young people like to do, go clubbing, go out. Well, if there's a high-speed rail network that allows them to get in and out of the cities easily, well, then they'll use that as well. So,
and then freight for like food and essential goods, right? Between
dramatically.
And then I think one comment was about defense as well.
Yeah, well, rapidly shifting resources. I mean, the defense, it has multiple benefits in terms of defense. Obviously, in the event of conflict, the rail network will be rapidly broken. Okay, so it's not like it's resilient to military attack, but in terms of moving logistical equipment around in preparation for conflict, it's a massive benefit. I mean, if you can move 100,000 tons of military hardware in the space of 3 hours from Poland to Tallinn, then that is going to really complicate issues for any potential aggressor. So defense-wise, it is really beneficial. And just also the and beyond that, standardizing the size of the rail line. So one of the things that this project forces these countries to do is to cooperate in terms of their transport planning. So that has built an administrative kind of nexus in terms of logistics of moving different products around. And that does have a lasting defense benefit, because if you've got pre-established cooperation in terms of moving large quantities of product rapidly, well, that is absolutely necessary in the event of an emergency. So defense and also just national resilience for natural disasters, all kinds of things. It has a lot of benefits. And as you said, in the just moving freight around, moving product around, well, that was the analysis done by Ernst & Young, which justified the project in the first place. They didn't even look at all of these capability enhancements, and that's where I think the benefit really snowballs. They looked specifically at, okay, if it costs X dollars to move bananas from A to B, and we save Y amount by having it on this rail freight, how much will you make over the course of X number of years? Very simple calculations, okay? And it was still manyfold benefit.
Well, it also makes food more affordable, right? And living expenses more affordable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly also with increasing rules in the EU around carbon emissions. So one of the things that is true for the Baltic states is that their cars use a much higher level, on average, amount of CO2 output than sort of the newer cars in Germany and France. And also because there is a limitation on energy importation. Obviously, there's Belarus and issues there. There's issues with Russia. So they have limited choices in terms of energy generation. So in order to meet all their CO2 targets and avoid these additional tax burdens and carbon credits and all those sorts of things, having rail freight makes things much, much cheaper.
Reduce the cars on the road. And then...
Reduces the cars on the road,
Cool. Another thing you talked about this week was Macedonia and Bulgaria. So it got a lot of downvotes. And I've done some surface level reading, and there seems to be, I guess, some conflict in terms of, I guess, the recognition of Macedonia and its history. Like, they cross over a fair bit. Can you explain to me why it's so controversial?
Sure. And look, I did not anticipate that it would be this controversial. In fact, I'd really tried to stay away from the controversy. I saw a video by a British academic which had, I don't know, 100,000 views. And despite it having, like, it being a very mainstream sort of guy, it was evenly split, had even more downvotes percentage-wise than ours did. And this is the lowest rated video that we've had. And that's because I think a lot of Bulgarians have gotten on there and downvoted it because they think that we're taking Macedonia's side in their historical disputes. And that's not what I said in my video. As I said multiple times, I don't have a view on this because I don't know enough about it. What I do have a view on is the tactics used by the Bulgarian government, which waited. It waited until North Macedonia had cleared every other hurdle, and then in the last minute came in and said, no, we're vetoing because we don't like what they say in their textbooks. They had years of opportunity to bring this up, and they didn't. And then once North Macedonia had done everything the EU had asked of them, the Bulgarian government punched them in the back of the head. And that's just not acceptable in international affairs. And this is not an issue that should be playing out in EU accession. It doesn't have anything to do with the European Union. It has everything to do with cultural identity, language, history, and ethnic affinity and ethnogenesis. This dispute can continue to play out irrespective of whether North Macedonia is part of the EU or not. It's not really relevant for that subject. So that's where I am firm, and I think the Bulgarian government needs to...
So do all the countries need to be in agreement in order for Macedonia to...
All the countries need to be in agreement. And it's really, like, it really upsets me when I see what happened to North Macedonia here, because they prostrated themselves before the Greeks. They had this long-running dispute with Greece. They gave in on every single point, and the Greeks said, "Okay, we've done this. We've worked together. We've got to the point where we can agree, and now we no longer object to you being part of the European Union." And so there was a belief that everyone else in the European Union was on the same page. Bulgaria did not have an objection. And then it was only in that last step that Bulgaria jumped in and said, actually, we want you to change everything about your textbooks, your history. It was just a rude thing to do to a group of people. And I can see the animosity growing as a result. And the rest of the European Union has looked at Bulgaria with a dim view. So yes, there are a number of Bulgarians who, strongly supporting what their government is doing. And as I said in the video, some 86% of the Bulgarian population doesn't want North Macedonia to be part of the EU because of these issues. So there is a lot of domestic support for beating up on the North Macedonians.
But you're saying it's not relevant to the working of the EU.
Exactly. It's absolutely not relevant. And also the way they went about it was just extremely obnoxious. If they were going to use this as a cudgel to beat North Macedonia down, they should have mentioned it way back 10 years ago when the Greeks were talking about their issues. Okay. So they waited for North Macedonia to get through all the issues with Greece, and it was the last final step, and then Bulgaria jumped in. And I was like, that's extremely poor form. Okay, so yes, it's getting down votes, and yes, people are upset with what I'm saying in Bulgaria, but my view is not the controversial view. I'm pretty much sharing the entire perspective of the 500 million Europeans who all agree. Right? This is an issue that the Bulgarians need to not change that. Like, they might be right about the dispute. Okay, it is true that ancient Bulgaria spread over a much larger territory and had a significant influence in that region, and that the languages of Macedonia and Bulgaria are very similar, and therefore it could be more of a dialectal language. I don't know, but to use this weapon is in this way is inappropriate. And I don't feel like it's a particularly subjective thing. I think this is something that most people who aren't directly involved in it, and as I said, I'm a guy on the other side of the world, and I'm looking at this going, this is crazy, can take a firm view on. So I don't mind the downvotes. I was surprised at...
I think people have much national pride.
Well, and I'm not disputing that. I'm absolutely... This is why I was a little bit... I think a lot of people just didn't watch the video properly. And seeing some of the comments, it was clear that some people hadn't and had just reacted to the first thing that they saw. Which, and it kind of got me... I don't know if it got me in trouble with YouTube, but when you upload to YouTube, you have to give things a rating in terms of like how controversial... And I said it was like a little bit controversial. I didn't think it was going to be like this massive divide. And so, YouTube will take that into consideration when judging my ratings, because obviously it wasn't accurately predictive. But no, so the actual issue that the Bulgarians have, though, is that North Macedonia is claiming that like their language is Macedonian, their history is Macedonian, and that they have a specific Macedonian tradition and taking cultural claim over everything that kind of happened in that territory for a long period of time.
Right.
And what the Bulgarians are saying is actually Macedonia, all the Macedonians are essentially an offshoot of Bulgarians, and all of the things that they're claiming Macedonians did were actually old ancient Bulgarians, and that the Macedonian language is not actually a different language, it's a dialect of Bulgarian to the point that they're mutually intelligible if you're hearing them speak. And thus, what the North Macedonians are doing in order to create their national identity, they're really trying to rub out the influence of Bulgaria in that process. Now, I think it's an interesting debate to be had without the emotional investiture, because I think that at what point does an ethnicity become a nation?
Yeah, I'm
and
thinking.
It's and that's a difficult thing. It's a matter of judgment, and I do think that the Macedonians probably have been a bit overzealous in terms of trying to create that national identity in a way that doesn't do due deference to their historical roots. But equally, if I was in North Macedonia right now, listening to the way the Bulgarian government is behaving towards my country, I wouldn't really want to be affiliated with these people. This is just, there's a lot of own goals happening here in the Balkans, and there just isn't enough empathy, let's say, is what I'm saying. What I've said here is probably more strident than what I said in the actual video, but looking at their reactions,
I wish I just negotiated, but let's write a history book together.
Yeah, and as I said, the Bulgarians do have
I think the Bulgarians have
issues.
Yeah, I do agree.
But the way in which they've gone about it is not going to solve anything.
Yeah,
and it's going to make a lot of people in Europe line up with the Macedonians.
It's kind of funny. It's kind of like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're like, oh yeah, we're all good. If they hold this resentment towards you until the very end, and what's going on? I thought we were cool, right?
Yeah. No, I know. Look, it's sad that this tension exists, because I think there are Bulgarians and Macedonians have so many similarities that I think so, so it's unfortunate that they're not getting along. They really should. I mean, Bulgaria was the first country to recognize the sovereignty of Macedonia, and so there was a lot of promise at one stage, and I just hope that things improve. But in the meantime, it's not just and keep this in mind, everybody, it's not just holding up North Macedonia's bid, it's holding up Albania as well. Albania, imagine thinking Albania, they're not even part of this.
Not part of this domestic.
They've done everything right. They're ready to join the European Union. And because they're the rest of the EU is we'll deal with North Macedonia and Albania together because they share a border, they're right there, they have their bids together. It's easier just administratively to bring them both on at the same time. And then they can celebrate the anniversaries and things together. And yet, they're just stuck there because Bulgaria decided to sucker punch North Macedonia, and Albania is just oh great, guys, what about us? And so let's not forget Albania in all of this. I am
Albania's the poor third party that was
they're the housemate who are just
the other housemate.
So anyway,
they have to look at this domestic. You're
they have to clean up all the broken dishes and things. It's just it's unfortunate. Anyway, so look, I mean, one of the reasons that this is a Baltic channel, not a Balkans channel, is the Baltic has a lot of promise for the future, and the Balkans is the Balkans.
Yeah, we'll go back to the Baltic. So, pro-Kremlin entertainers in Lithuania. Yeah, so where does it... I think there was a comment about where whether you can keep art and politics separate from each other.
Yeah,
even though art greatly influences politics in some respects.
Yeah, intellectually, I think this is the most interesting video that I did this week. So and I was kind of musing as I was talking, so I might have been a bit rambly in the video. I apologize if that's the case, because I was really thinking out aloud. The dispute, well, the controversy is that you have performers from Russia who are entertainers who go and they perform in Russian-occupied areas of the Ukraine, so Donetsk, Donbass, Crimea, and some of them are like, very nationalistic Russians that are really proud of all of this. And Lithuania's government is considering whether or not to ban people and under what circumstances. And there was an MP that wanted to prohibit Lugansky, this fantastic pianist, and I'll get Charlene to listen to him after this video to just show how much of a virtuoso this guy is, from playing at the Lithuanian National Philharmonic. And the reason being that he had gone and played in Donbass as recently as August, so very recently. And there's dispute, and the cultural minister's going, okay, well, do we want to ban people for this reason? Is this a good enough reason? And then there is another individual, Kirkorov, who is a public kind of pop star who sings a lot of nationalistic songs, who is also due to come to Lithuania but has been banned from Lithuania, and whether or not he should be banned and where the line should be drawn.
It's a very CCP kind of thing, because if you speak against the CCP, like, they would immediately ban you from performing in the country.
Well, that's actually a good point. Like, let's say you are a Russian who is anti-Putin, okay? Think of the Pussy Riot singers, right? Who performed the anti-Russian songs. They were all thrown in jail.
Yeah.
They're not going to be doing tours around parts of Russia being a really successful pop group. They're going to be imprisoned or worse. And thus, it shouldn't really surprise people that the successful pop performers in Russia are, nationalist Russians, because they're indoctrinated with Russian propaganda. That's the way it works. And so the question, and I think the comments were really revealing, and I really appreciated everyone's remarks on this, which was that basically they thought Lugansky is okay because he's just a pianist. He doesn't propagandize. He gets up and performs, and if he happens to perform in places which are, disputed territories or Russian occupied territories, then that's okay. He's just a pianist playing his piano, right? Whereas this other guy sings these nationalist songs about Crimea being part of Russia and all of this sort of thing. And I think that's a reasonable line to draw if someone is using their art as their political speech, right? And there are people out there that sing political songs. There's nothing wrong with that. Then I think governments can take a more circumspect view on whether or not that person should be allowed to come and sing those songs in the country. Right. And this line has to be drawn separately in each place. So, for example, you're not going to go to Israel and sing Holocaust denial songs, right? You'll get thrown in jail, and Israel will be absolutely correct not to allow these people to come in the first place, right? So there are certain things that are out of bounds.
But what hits the grey area when they hold these political views, but they don't sing about their political views. They perform in that way. They just perform really great music.
Yeah, and we should keep those things separate. I really do. In fact, I'm in a minority of people. I don't actually know if it's a minority or a majority, but I know a lot of my Republican friends in the Republican Party in the US want to boycott the Beijing Olympics, okay, because they say that, look, the CCP propagandizes their, the Winter Olympics coming up in 2022. And I'm against that. I think the Olympics is one of those few times and places where people can put politics aside and really cheer for individual human endeavor. And there's I think a real human reason we need to do that. We have to keep that kind of utopian future in the back of our minds, that there can still be a better world where we can all come together and that we are more than just our tribal division. So that's one reason why I think art and politics needs to be kept distinct. The other reason is that Lithuania has the greatest respect from me of just about any country in terms of its foreign policy, because it does things on a principled basis. It's doing things with Taiwan because of its principles, not because it's economically beneficial or whatever, just because they see that as the right thing to do. And Lithuania is the biggest in terms of liberalism, in terms of free speech, in terms of standing up for what it means to be a democracy. Yeah. And if you start banning people, if you start censoring people, you risk your moral authority, okay? So even though you might think that people have a really negative, destructive viewpoint that you don't think is going to be helpful to your society, to have people, start fights and things over it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, those things are negative. You can say, look, that's a negative thing. But if you put that in the broader context of like, what is it our country about? Are we confident enough to tolerate people with whom we disagree, provided they don't do things that are, let's say, inciting, right? Because that's what we believe in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of ideas and sovereignty of the individual. I think that's a really great just thing to think about. There's always going to be case by case, and I'm not saying that. I think the position of Luganski should be he should be able to play. I think that most people in the comment section tended to agree. I do think that if someone is using their singing to sing nationalist Russian songs in some other country where they're singing to a bunch of people that have been occupied and people who are living in exile, I think that should be prohibited. So I think that that's a kind of a sensible line to draw, but you should have a high litmus test. That you should always bias in favor of allowing people to say and speak what they believe, and you should have a good reason to prohibit that. And for that reason to make sense to anyone that you are like, you to be able to be transparent about that. Say, look, this is the reason this person is being prohibited in this way.
Yeah.
If they want to express a political view, they can do it in this way, which is not the same. Okay, so for example. People need to be what they are. So if you're a singer who is famous for being a pop star, come and sing pop songs, right? If you want to give a Russian point of view in Lithuania, I think that should be allowed. I think that should be allowed if you are a Russian political actor coming to Lithuania for that purpose.
Yeah, for that purpose, yes.
Right. So everything is above board. You're not trying to do anything subversive. You're not trying to incite people. You're just there to give a lecture or give a perspective. And because you're into free and open debate, that's what separates you from China. That's what separates you from Russia, is that those voices are welcome and heard. And thus, you shouldn't be fighting fire with fire. You defeat your political adversaries by being better, by being the example of what you would like them to be. And that's my view. Yeah. But no, I thought the discussion now in those comments was very constructive. And also, just on comments, a lot of people, particularly on that Macedonian video, said, look, there was censorship, Crispin is deleting all the comments.
Yeah,
and stuff.
Crispin, what's going on?
I have never, ever deleted a comment that wasn't spam. If people are saying, click this link for you can see my naked webcam or whatever, then I'll delete it. But otherwise, I've never touched a comment. And I never will. But you have to understand that the YouTube algorithm, like YouTube is not run by people. It's run by
computers.
It's run by an artificial intelligence, okay?
Yeah.
And that artificial intelligence is designed to make as much money for Google as possible, okay? And the way that works is they want to have advertisers or spending the most amount of money on each video. Now, the advertisers bid with one another to get to be displayed before a particular audience. Now, if there are comments down below that are really like inflammatory or a lot of swearing or a lot of argument and stuff like that, mainstream businesses that pay the most for their advertising, so the massive multinational corporations, they don't want to have their videos on brand on YouTube channels that create controversy for them. They don't want to have their brand associated with division. They want to have everyone holding hands and being together. So when you make a comment, yes, I support debate and exchange, but when you make a comment, just try to make sure that it's like imagine you were telling it to your grandmother. Okay, that's the level, because that's what the YouTube algorithm goes for. They say, look, if you were working for a multinational company which was risk averse and you wanted to have your advertising going in front of the mums and dads of the world, would this comment undermine that? Okay,
And I have recognized that any swearing immediately gets filtered. Like any types of swearing, we can have discussions without swearing in it. So
sure, absolutely. Yeah. So just be mindful of that. Like we don't censor, but the algorithm does, and it does because it's looking for profit. Okay, so keep that in mind. Just it's a good little education thing for you guys when you're doing when people are making comments. It's not because we care if that you're swearing or what. It's what the multinational companies that are bankrolling this whole enterprise want.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because a lot of the comments are quite lengthy, right? Imagine like writing out this whole comment just for it to be filtered by YouTube, and we would never delete that. There's been lots of thought, lots of effort into that comment, and fortunately we do have opportunity sometimes, not all the time, sometimes YouTube will give us a second chance to review the comments and then post it. So there are some times that I will go in manually and see if YouTube has filtered comments that they haven't outright banned.
Most of them just get outright.
Yeah, most of them, if there is very. But anyway, Tom Baltic.
My watch. Okay. I'll probably get some B-roll happening with this watch because it's mostly on the back that's the beautiful part because it's a skeleton watch and it's completely transparent and it's a Theorema. It's made by the same people who make Tofino watches. It's a German watch and it is quite affordable for a skeleton watch. Okay, so most skeleton watches can cost a few $1,000s. This is less than $1,000 or basically $500. It is, it's still an investment, but I have to say this watch has done me a lot of pride. I get a lot of comments at the poker table about it. It works perfectly. It's a wind-up watch, super easy to maintain. It's quite sturdy. The only drawback to it is that it's a bit thick on the side, right? And then the glass panel kind of sticks out in a sort of a curvature, in a sort of concave way, convex or whatever it is. And it doesn't need to be that high. It could actually be a bit thinner when I look at where the hands of the watch are. So that is my limited complaint. But if you want a nice watch, and they're not paying me for this, man, we should start doing product videos. we really start needing to sell the products. In fact, when we do the merchandising, I'll reach out to these guys to see if we can make a deal because this is a product I would recommend. And that was one of the conditions, by the way, because we talk about different revenue streams, and obviously at some point we want to do merchandising, but we want to focus obviously on the Baltic in terms of the products for the rest of the world to get Baltic products, and then also for the rest of the world to provide products to our Baltic audience. But one of the conditions that I had set was that it had to be quality. It had to be stuff that people would use. I don't want people just donating to our channel and seeing it as a money sink for us. I think the products that you guys get should be things that you would appreciate, and you would come to us to buy stuff that you would want to use.
Yeah. I was so cynical about these things that Crispin buys because he's like, guess what I bought on Facebook? And I mean, it was a Facebook ad.
I mean, look at. I mean, you'll never be able to see on the screen, but look at the carving. Like on the back here, there's little patterns on the. Like this is a handmade watch as well, by the way. This is not factory built. It's made by hand.
Yeah,
there you go.
Maybe it is a generational thing. I don't know, because I don't really have any. Like, why can't it show my steps and give me my messages?
Can't give you a heart rate. Yeah.
Can't tell my heart rate. Like.
All right, what you guys need to do, and a man needs a watch. So like it's a symbol of masculinity and refinement. And so choose a good watch. Make sure it's an analog. Don't get all the extra like smartwatchy bits and pieces. That's just silly. Think of a classic clock, classic engineering, and this one has done me really, really good service. So I've only had it for about 7-8 months, so maybe it'll break down next week. But the other actual problem with it, is that the clasp you get is a bit clunky and a bit sticky. But after you've worn it for a while, obviously it loosens up because you get used to it. And also the clasp on the side is a bit firm when you're trying to do the wind up. So it's a bit like a bit on the strong side to force things open and close. But again, you'll get used to it and it gets easier as it goes along.
Yeah, we definitely need to be sponsored by this watch company now. No, all good. Yeah.
Okay, now it's definitely time to wrap up.
Yeah, it is. That's all the time.
Stop at the class.
Yeah. That's all the time we have for today. Any questions, any feedback, please leave them down below. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao for now.